Welcome to The Athletic, live in New Orleans, coming to you guys from the Toyota studio at Radio Row. I am Robert Mays. We're going to be coming to you guys all week, same time, 5 p.m. Eastern. Please, if you will, we'd love for you to comment in the chat. We're going to get to some of your questions over the course of the week. We'd love for you guys to be a part of what we're doing. If you could like, subscribe, and follow Scoop City and The Athletic Football Show wherever you get your podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, we'd very much appreciate that. Today, we're going to hit the highlights from this season as we get ready for the Super Bowl. Also look at some of the news from the Senior Bowl that's crept out over the last couple of weeks, and just more housekeeping stuff before we get to Super Bowl week.
Day one. It's day one here. Even though there's not a lot of people here, there's the buzz is starting a little bit with the Eagles and the Chiefs being on the ground finally at their hotels. Media night tonight.
Yep.
So everyone's looking forward to that because, plenty of Taylor Swift questions, but every year there's always some good stories to come out of it, things that we've never even known about what's going on with these teams. So I'm looking forward to doing that tonight as we're just kicking this thing off.
As we, all week, Diana is going to be here with us, and then also Derek Klesson is going to be joining us. This is your first Super Bowl. This is the first time you're doing this. How are you feeling right now?
I feel ecstatic. I mean, kind of like Diana just said, you can start to feel the buzz, and since I've never done this before, it's very new because, as I've done this job, first you go to the Senior Bowl, and it's like, okay, you can start to feel this out. And then you go to the Combine, it's like, okay, you start to feel how this goes. And now to be at the Super Bowl, which is kind of like the pinnacle, this is the end-all, be-all.
It is.
It's a really cool feeling. I'm loving it.
Is it everything you hoped it would be?
We're early,
It's
so
early.
I don't know. We got to get to the end of the week, but so far, yes.
There's this thing on TikTok. It's like a little trend where when you arrive to a wedding, you do a video with a friend and you go, it's my first drink. And then at the end of the night, you go, it's my last drink. And you see the difference. I feel like we need to do that with you for day one and then show you on Friday on the show of what you look like and what you feel like. Because we can promise you it'll be a different feeling because this is nothing.
I would love that. We'll set it up after this show and then after the Friday show.
Yeah,
We'll do the same thing.
you're all
We'll see
fresh
how,
and
yeah,
thin.
Exactly.
As you and I talked about last night, I got here like 3 or 4 days ago, which is an extremely aggressive choice. I'm already tired, which that's not a good place to start.
We haven't even
It's
started.
definitely the wrong way to start a Super Bowl week. The right way to start a Super Bowl week is with some pretty massive news that came out this morning. Sometimes you wade into the week, it's a little bit slower on Monday, and then things ramp up. There was no waiting this week. Massive bombshell broke this morning. Myles Garrett requests a trade officially from the Cleveland Browns. Just walk me through what you have heard about this and just where things currently sit with Myles Garrett, Cleveland, and just those two camps.
Well, I'll walk you through a very beautiful, quiet Monday morning that I was having. I don't often get to enjoy cities when I come in to cover games. And so because, like you said, it's been quiet around the league. Outside of the coaching cycle, there really hasn't been a lot going on except for, conversations that we're going to have about the upcoming free agency and obviously with draft stuff coming off the Senior Bowl. So I actually had the thought this morning of, man, I hope something happens because, otherwise we're just going to talk about this game for 5 days and then boom, we see that Myles Garrett publicly shares with the world that, he wants out of Cleveland. And this is something the Cleveland Browns have known for about 3 or 4 weeks. So they were not surprised as much as we were today. So they have known that, and they have a great relationship with Myles. And Myles has shown appreciation to them and has communicated, from what I was told, very well with the organization about how unhappy he's been, why he doesn't want to be a Cleveland Brown anymore, and made it public today to sort of start getting the ball moving here. Because a lot of teams, as you guys know, they want to get their orders in, their business in order by the start of the new league year.
Yeah.
So it's why I think the next few weeks are going to be busy for the Browns and for Myles Garrett in terms of the direction this is going to go and knowing that teams are going to want to get this settled.
The first question I would ask you, why now? Was there any sort of tipping point moment that happened in the back half of last season that has pushed him to what is a pretty extreme position here as we kick off the offseason?
Yeah, let me just state this, that from the start of all this, and even just the whispers around the league that this possibly could happen and that Myles was unhappy, the Browns have stuck with the same line and they have not wavered even after this news, which is we are not taking any calls on him, right? There was a wink. I don't know how to wink well. Look, I think that they're doing the right thing from a organizational stand right now of just saying, no, we're not doing this. He is too important to us. But for Miles, and he put this in his statement, and it stood out to me that he wants to play for a contender. This is somebody who's exhausted by the process, exhausted by bad teams, so much change. And it's very apparent that this all goes back to the Deshaun Watson contract, that it appears to be touching every single part of this team in the worst ways.
My big question about the Browns coming into this offseason, Derek, is where do they think they are? Because 2 years ago, you're a playoff team. You have the #1 defense in the league. And I think you could kind of frame their issues, even for a good chunk of this season, as, well, it's a quarterback problem. It's a quarterback problem. If we get that solved, are we actually closer to being a relevant franchise again than this year's record might indicate? And I think that's probably the line they would try to sell you. Myles Garrett taking this stance on it leads me to believe he has some doubts about that. And I think he has some doubts about what the Cleveland Browns are. So that kind of disconnect between a Browns organization that might try to sell you on the idea that with a couple tweaks we'll be right back in the mix, and Myles Garrett saying, I want to play for a contender. What do you think this says about the competing timelines that are happening in Cleveland right now?
I think Garrett's read on this, really the entire thing is fascinating. I think sometimes we see players ask for a trade and it seems kind of irrational. I don't really pin Myles Garrett as an irrational man. He seems like he has thought this out very well. And so to me, I think this is a guy who kind of sees that it was more than a quarterback problem. Because when they did make the playoffs 2 years ago, this was a team that was heavily focused around what Nick Chubb could do in the run game. And I think the offensive line was better. They had Bill Callahan in the building. Like, this was just a very different, I think, offensive roster. And I think still, even to this day, the wide receiver core is a little bit more disparate and inconsistent than they would probably like. So I think he saw all of that, saw some of the regression in the back end on the defense, and is probably just less willing to believe that, with a couple of tweaks that we can get back there next year. I think it's possible he feels like this thing has eroded away from them just a little bit, enough to where at his age, 29, going into kind of maybe the end of a typical prime for an athlete, he probably wants to be like, I don't know if I can stick around for 2 or 3 more years for us to get over that hump. I'd rather go play somewhere else.
If they do trade him, if you look back at the last 3, 4, 5 years, I think that there were clear markers of who the Cleveland Browns were. Before Jim Schwartz got there, it was offensive line, run game, play action. That's who we are on offense. That's the identity of this team. They kind of shift away from that in year 1 under Deshaun Watson, but the defense is like a season-defining unit. They were the best defense in football. This year, that falls away. If you trade Myles Garrett, what are the Cleveland Browns? Because right now, the way that I would frame it is the Browns are Myles Garrett and then a bunch of other pieces that don't make a ton of sense together. If you remove the Myles Garrett part of that equation, what are they?
Well, I think that's what Myles Garrett knows, is he's looking around. And to your point about him understanding, having the pulse of what this team is, he doesn't need to be a general manager to see what's next to him every single day at practice. I remember over the summer going there for training camp and talking about it on Scoop City, and Chase said, so what'd you think? What'd you see out there? And I was like, it wasn't great.
Yeah.
It wasn't, and I know it was early and training camp can change, but their roster got older. They have some salary cap issues. They paid some guys that they shouldn't have paid. And you have a general manager in Andrew Berry, a head coach in Kevin Stefanski, a 2-time coach of the year, which it's hard to imagine that type of success now when it wasn't that long ago that he had a grip on the offense. And now, after this past season, especially with no answers, they look lost. Their identity was swirling the drain before Myles Garrett wanted out. And now if they continue to go down this road where perhaps this becomes a reality, they're in the drain. They're in the sewer because there is no one else there, and there's no other leader. That always stood out. I mean, we always said Jameis, right? Because my issue with always pointing out that Jameis was the leader, or at least the vocal leader, my thought was, why is the backup quarterback at the time the leader? That's not good. So I think the reality is, whether Andrew Berry or Kevin Stefanski will admit it, this team is in rebuild mode. They're going to have to tear this down.
But that's my question. Is ownership going to be willing to live with that? Like, do these guys have long enough leashes to tear it down? I think there are plenty of things stacking up now where the Browns and Andrew Berry are incentivized to just see if cooler heads will prevail here. I think it's from a team-building perspective, from a messaging perspective to ownership, but also a financial perspective. If you look at the way the Browns have handled their cap, they keep borrowing from future years over and over and over again. If you remove one of those puzzle pieces, if they were to trade Myles Garrett before June 1st, he would have a $36 million dead cap hit. His cap hit for 2025 would go up by like $15 million. they don't have the wiggle room to sustain something like that. So I think on multiple different levels, they're incentivized to see if they can make this work.
Yeah.
The question is that possible?
Yeah, how? What do? You call them in and you say, we'll give you guaranteed money. Can they?
And that's the thing.
Do they want to do that again?
If his potential complaint is that the team is not good enough and that maybe in the next year it's not going to be good enough, the thought process would be, okay, well, we'll go draft whatever you wanted at the top of the draft, or we'll go pay money for all this and stuff. But to your point, they already don't have the money. So I don't know how they're supposed to build the team around him that he probably wants to believe that they can get to the next step. So I really don't know what they do. Do you think that there's a world potentially that they kind of agree in principle to a trade for post-June 1? Like, is that even a possibility?
Well, the problem is that the way that the cap works on that is he's still on your books.
Oh, I guess it
chunk
doesn't
of that.
matter.
So I just feel like there are a lot of impediments to this happening, and I think that there is an argument that the Browns are best served by just saying, hey, can we figure this out? Because I do think the financial part of it and also the team building part of it, like in a vacuum, I think that trading Myles Garrett, let's say it's 2 first-round picks, just throwing it out there. You get 2 first-round picks for Myles Garrett, you are in full-scale rebuild mode. Based on where the rest of the roster is, I think you could argue that's not a bad path to take. You take the best player available in the top 5. You maybe kick the can down the road on your quarterback situation until the 2026 draft when you'll have 2 first-round picks. If we're doing this on a spreadsheet, I think that makes sense. I just don't know if Andrew Berry has that amount of time and leeway to go about it that way.
Who in the room is going, Mr. Haslam, we're not winning, and we have an asset to get draft capital. Let's do this. Who is going to have the galls to do and tell the owner we're not good? Because it falls on them,
but
right?
You just went all in 3 years in a row. So how are you going to tell the owner, guess what? All those things we did to be a winner right now, we're not good.
Didn't work.
I just think that's a really hard sell.
Well, so here, and maybe this is just my assessment of the roster, but if we assume that if they kind of chalk this year, they trade Myles Garrett, they take a step back, and we're saying in that world that maybe Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski don't have a leash, isn't it pretty likely that this team only wins maybe 7 games, 8 games at most next year, and they just end up getting fired anyway? Like, isn't that a pretty likely possibility as well?
This is a pattern. We just talked about it on the show yesterday. We're seeing the same mistakes where owners, they know the answer. They know what direction this is headed in. Mm-hmm. Nobody has the answers for it.
And they won't accept it.
They won't just say, this is not working. Unless Jimmy Haslam says, okay, this isn't working. I'm willing to stick with you guys, though. I believe in what you want to do together, right? They're a tandem. They work very well.
And I think you could make that argument. I think if you looked at this and said, hey, we're going to be rebuilt, and we honestly think the best people to be in charge of a rebuild are Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. It's a very hard pivot away from what you've been trying to do the last few years. But if you believe in the people at the top, I think you can make an argument that you'd believe in them to oversee something like this. I just think it would be a pretty huge admission of fault for what you've done the last few years, and it would be a very hard pivot away from how this organization has been thinking of itself. You were at training camp last year. I think in their minds, they believed that if Watson could turn it around, they would be competitive right now. It feels like we're very, very far away from
Very
that.
far. And look, well, maybe the new trend is owners admitting they've made mistakes. We saw Robert Kraft do it. Maybe Jimmy Haslam will come out and say, yeah, maybe we didn't get this right.
Before we get away from this, very quickly, your dream Myles Garrett destination that is relatively realistic is what?
Oh my gosh, I haven't even thought of that. I mean, it's got to be basically any 4-down team, but like, I don't know if Detroit really has the assets or the cap to do it, but that is very obvious.
What about the Chargers?
So
like
the Chargers is very fun.
Commanders is my second favorite.
They also have the money. That is a great one.
That they've paid the quarterback, but they still have some financial wiggle room, and there's a good chance they'll move on from Bosa and Mack this offseason. So they'll have the space to do that. Washington, to me, makes a ton of sense.
Yes,
they have the immediate need. They're already a contending team. You could make an argument. If you look at that spot, they have Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler. They haven't committed a lot of resources to that position overall. The team that I'll just throw out, solely being a massive homer.
Oh, here we go.
The Bears have 3 picks in the top 40, and they have a lot of cap space over the next couple of years. You're already paying Montez $25 million, but you're on a rookie quarterback deal, and you don't have that many pieces you've paid. So I have to at least mention them as part of this conversation.
So while the story's happening, I start reaching out to different GMs to find out, hey, what do you think of this trade? Or which team do you think should go after Myles Garrett? And I had one general manager say that the Raiders should look into it because think about what better way to stop Patrick Mahomes and have him line up with Max Crosby, who we don't even know. Maybe Max is going to take a page out of Myles Garrett's book here.
Collectively, though, the idea of like trading, let's say it's a first and a second. Let's be cautious about the price tag. Trading a first and second round pick and then giving Myles Garrett $35 million a year when you've already paid Max Crosby and you're already paying Christian Wilkins $25 million a year. It's a fun idea. I do not think it is responsible team building if you're John Spytek.
It's not responsible, but they're good chance they're going to draft a quarterback, so they're getting some money back there by taking
Which one?
There.
The quarterbacks are going to be gone by the time they pick at 6.
No, they've got Bridge.
I think they'll not
they've got
go
Sam
as high as
Darnold
we
written
think
all
that
over
they're
them.
going to go.
If that's the case, and if you want to be competitive right now, I think you could kind of make that argument. But then, combined, you'd have $35 million of Myles Garrett, $35 million of Sam Darnold, $25 million of Christian Wilkins, and $25 million of Max Crosby. That's not a lot of wiggle room, and that's a lot of holes still on that roster.
Who are you throwing the ball to?
Yeah, I think there are enough
everything.
holes to consider there where that would be fun. I think responsibility should kind of win out here.
I'm trying to think if there's any other team that we're missing that needs a Myles Garrett right now.
So the one I will throw out, and the finances for 2025 are difficult, but for 2026 they'll probably have the wiggle room to do this, is the Atlanta Falcons.
I mean, that would be the easiest way to... Actually, I don't love this because every Falcons pass rusher is cursed, and I fear that this would instantly ruin Myles Garrett's career. So I actually don't want this to happen.
I do think the factor of him wanting to go to a team that would be in contention. I don't see the Falcons as being that team. But I hear you. There's going to be a difference between a team that needs, wants, and it will be desperate for one versus.
In all honesty, I think you can make an argument that with Myles Garrett, the Falcons get kind of interesting. Like, the defensive line is easily their biggest hole. They have Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata right now on deals they can get out from under if they want to, and they just hired Jeff Ulbrich. They're changing their defensive system and scheme, and so going to a 4-down world and having Myles Garrett be the pillar of that.
I think from our perspective, the Atlanta Falcons are a good, I'll take a chance to see if they'll be good type of team. I think if you are in Myles Garrett's position where you are adamant that you want to play for a contender, I'm not sure they're quite there yet.
How about just like the biggest blockbuster Super Bowl week story that would ever happen in our lifetime? The team playing in the Super Bowl, the Kansas City Chiefs, make the trade with the Cleveland Browns for Myles Garrett. Could you imagine? They just do it right now.
Just Chris Jones and Myles Garrett on the same defense?
Yeah. Get it done. That would be incredible. Or even if Howie does it.
I think that the teams who have rookie quarterback contracts and have resources and flexibility, that's probably where I would start this conversation. You're willing to do things against the cap and how you're allocating your resources that maybe are a little bit outside of your comfort zone when a player like Myles Garrett is involved. But I think the teams that when you look at it, we have $80 million in cap space, we've got a young quarterback, this is the time to do it. That's probably where I would start. And I think that Chicago, Washington, those sorts of teams is probably the first place where I would get this going.
Youngest player to 100 sacks. Some team will figure out a trade package that I think will be tempting for the Cleveland Browns, and we'll see if we'll be looking back on this and going, well, it really happened, guys. Because right now, the Browns do not want to do this.
Speaking of the Washington football team, I want to talk about our personal highlights from this season. We've got 4 days to talk about the game and the Super Bowl. We are going to be able to break down those matchups in depth for a very long time. I wanted to spend a little bit of time today just looking back at the season that was to get us ready for the biggest game of that season. So Dan, I'll start with you. Just when you're thinking back on this regular season, what is the storyline or the team or the moment that you feel like is really going to stick with you 5-10 years from now?
I'm at a point in my career where I enjoy when I'm so wrong and off about a team. I used to get embarrassed by it and worried that the fans, the listeners would judge. But now,
by the way, we've got our worst takes about this season coming up later in the show. So we're going to have plenty of time to sit in this.
Because we'll start here because I spent the summer just crushing the Buffalo Bills, not pointing the finger at their front office, at Brandon Beane saying that he didn't do enough. It was more, this is just not going to be the year for them. Yeah. And it was truly the first year where you sense the target was off their back because the rest of the world, I think, was looking at them going, they're not going to be that good.
It's a reset year.
They don't have any star receivers. It was this sort of tinkering of this roster. And I've always believed in Josh Allen. I think we can all consistently say that, but I just felt that maybe it was too much of a feat to overcome alone. And then they go to the AFC Championship game for the 5th time. So to me, that was my favorite story of the year, just because I didn't really have a lot of expectations for them. And Josh had one of his best seasons, and just the fact that he's been able to get rid of the mistakes that we've seen him make over the years, I think it's fun to witness growth in general, in any sport. And we've seen this. We're seeing a new level of Josh Allen now that he's fixed and corrected a lot of those just kind of dumb mistakes he used to make, especially in the red zone.
I love this because that would be up there on my list as well. I had a similar feeling about the Bills coming into this season where I was like, yeah, they have Josh Allen. The offensive line has been transformed. They can really run the ball. There's flexibility on offense that there wasn't before, but who's he going to throw the ball to? You have so many changes on defense. A lot of the guys that maybe if the names were bigger than the production last year for some of those guys in the Buffalo defense. But even if we concede that, you still have a lot of unproven talent at safety. Matt Milano's coming into the season hurt. I thought, okay, best case scenario, they're a wild card team. They sneak into the playoffs, and we think 2025 will be better for them. And then there were stretches of this year where they felt like the best team in football. And so I think a few things got reframed for me. One, what you can accomplish when you have one of the best 3 players in the league and a good offensive line, it's more than you think, right? That is a good starting point to overachieve. And then 2, just how well run and competent that building is. I think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt in ways that I probably wasn't ready to give them. And based on the way that this season went, I think I've learned my lesson a little bit.
And I just thought this was one of Sean McDermott's best coaching years.
Yes.
He made some mistakes along the way. It wasn't perfect, but this was really the first time. My takeaway from some of these games was they were really well coached. They were really prepared in this matchup, and that's a testament to him and his continued growth as well.
What would your biggest storyline of this season be, Derek, as you kind of look back at the season that was?
I mean, mine kind of started from basically the preseason. Derrick Henry getting to play with Lamar Jackson. These are two of, I've said this a number of times on the show. They are 2 of the rarest athletes we've ever seen at their positions. Lamar Jackson, there aren't many guys who have played the position like him. Derrick Henry, he looks like a defensive end. If you lined up every NFL player and pointed at Derrick Henry, you'd say that guy rushes the passer.
One of my favorite on the sideline moments at any training camp ever is the first time I went to Titans training camp. I can't remember what year it was. It was probably like 2016, 2017. And I'm standing there on the sideline, and I'm looking at Deion Lewis and Derrick Henry standing next to each other, and I was like, this is the most beautiful sport in the world. It really is the most beautiful sport there is.
The fact that they're playing the same position and look
just
so
couldn't be
different.
more perfect.
Yeah.
His legs were always, to me, they always stood out because they were so thin, right? Like Derrick's
His legs were the size of Deion Lewis.
And that idea of pairing Derrick Henry with Lamar Jackson, the thought of it and the imagination, it's like, okay, this could be incredible if it works out. And I think you could make an argument that it worked out as well as it possibly could have. Like, we got the best possible version of those 2 guys in the same offense, and for somebody who was already excited about it, I can't imagine how rewarding that was to watch every single week.
It was just absolutely beautiful. We got the best version of Lamar Jackson, and we got, Derrick Henry has obviously had other really high points in his career, but the last 2 years it was like, okay, he's kind of running into a brick wall all the time in Tennessee. This is not the best offensive team. Is he losing it? The production was really down. For him to get paired with a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, who buys you space by virtue of him standing on the field, for Derrick Henry to be able to operate in that and really show himself as the home run hitter that he is. Like, I think we kind of get wrapped up in the size and how big he is and how much he hits. He's the best home run hitter in the league outside of Saquon Barkley, and he's 240 pounds. I just thought this marriage, and also all of this too, Lamar Jackson got faster this year. He cut some weight, and so the fact that you have that juxtaposition, I just really don't know outside of these 2 specifically if we'll ever see a backfield that looks like this again.
It feels as dynamic as these 2 do. And I think that the running back conversation, we're going to revisit that a little bit later in the week when we talk to a couple NFL running backs as part of these shows, which, by the way, we're going to have plenty of conversations, interviews with NFL players from Radio Row as part of these live streams over the course of the week. So the Saquon conversation, I think, is part of this. My answer would be a combination of what you guys said. I think the Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, just little like MVP rivalry this year led to a lot of online toxicity. But I think that just them kind of pushing each other even from afar was really beautiful to watch. And I agree with you. it's the growth from both of those guys that I love to watch. Lamar having an MVP caliber year last year and then playing by far the best football of his career this season was beautiful, and I think you saw Josh Allen really fine-tune a lot of that stuff. So that back and forth between those guys, I'll really remember that as like a defining part of the season. But circling back to what we got wrong, what Washington did compared to my preseason expectations for Washington, I've just never been more wrong about a team and what they hoped to accomplish during a given year. I wasn't sure what the Jaden Daniels thing would look like. I wasn't sure what the Cliff Kingsbury thing would look like. I wasn't sure what a Dan Quinn coach defense would look like. Think about how Dan Quinn ended in Dallas, what that game looked like against the Packers. Now you go to a team with way less defensive talent, no Micah Parsons. You have no weapons on that offense other than Terry McLaurin. The offensive line is pieced together with like these mid-tier free agents. I just saw, if I had like a pie chart of their potential outcomes, fewer than 6 wins would have been like 60% of the pie chart. I just didn't see the path forward for them. And watching that change in real time and kind of seeing everything come together for them was such an instructive learning experience about the power of the right coach, the right ownership, the right offseason moves, and more than anything, the right quarterback. Like, we know in our bones how transformative a single quarterback can be, but then when you actually watch it happen again in real time and you feel it, I think it's just a reminder all over again of what that guy at the center of it can do for an entire organization, city, everything.
The forced multiplier mentality of just how much that can change. And remember, too, when Dan Quinn was hired, it was a very underwhelming hire.
It was like their fourth option.
Right?
They hired everybody else. They were so torn up they couldn't get Ben Johnson.
Mike
It was like
McDonald.
all of this
They were
stuff.
like, oh, can we get Mike McDonald?
Anthony Weaver, he came close to getting that job. And so I remember reporting when Dan Quinn got the job and thinking, all right, well, they went safe. They had to hire someone, and I think because of that, which is rude because we were just going based off what we knew and what we had seen. That I thought that there's no way that Dan Quinn is going to be able to get the most out of this team with a young rookie quarterback. And I think the other lesson in all this too is I think in the offseason we spend so much time, especially in the summer when we're talking about football so much and getting ready for the season, we get stuck and caught up in these storylines of optimism because we haven't seen any football yet. So many of those stories came true this year. Yeah. The Derrick Henry, the Saquon Barkley, the Jaden Daniels, the Dan Quinn. All at the time, if we go back and listen to ourselves, we sound like we're just being so positive about everything. But the fact that it's all lived up to it, I think, is what made it extra special for us.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to frame it because when I go around, you do the same thing. I'm at training camps throughout all of August, and the question that I kind of outline for everyone is like, why did you do the things that you did, and how do you see them all fitting together? And so everyone's trying to sell you the best version of it. And then it's up to you to kind of piece through what makes sense and what doesn't. And I think that selling point of, the way that Saquon is going to change our offense and what Jaden Daniels is and as a processor and like what this offense is going to look like. Even talking to Cliff Kingsbury and about some of the ideas he had about, we're going to use 2 backs together and it's going to work this way. It's like, all right, how many times has that ever worked? I think being maybe a little bit more optimistic about the teams we don't believe in and a little bit more pessimistic about the teams we should think we believe in, I think that's a good lesson from what this offseason felt like.
And also teams with so many unknowns. Like, this is a lot of unknowns for Washington.
And that could be a good thing.
Right, it can be a good thing. Like, I think we come into it thinking it's a bad thing. I certainly did. I did not think this Washington team would win more than 5 games. But, I think with Cliff, I wasn't very big on it. But this was the first time we've seen him as purely an NFL play caller, not a head coach. And then Jaden Daniels, it was like, okay, he could be nice as a rookie, but you didn't know that he could be what he became as a rookie. Yeah. And then with the offensive line, they reworked it so much that you look at all the players individually and it's like, but we'd never seen them all together. So it was like, okay, maybe you can make something out of
this offense.
And then they obviously did.
Did you think Zach Ertz was going to be as good as he was?
At this stage, absolutely.
Oh my God, there were so many guys that they signed where it's just like, man, these are some dusty dudes
that's what
in
I
2024.
And it wound up being the smartest thing to put around a young guy to teach him the way. And
just guys who know how to do it.
It became they became culture builders for what Dan Quinn is doing here. But you use the word toxicity, and I realized that my favorite toxic story, it turned toxic. It wasn't toxic this entire year, and now it is. It's the Joe Shane getting caught on camera during Hard Knocks, telling ownership that he's not going to let Saquon walk because
that might be the most wrong anyone has ever been.
I mean, I watched that clip more than any video of my children at this point in my life because it's all, you can't escape it. It got to a point where it was painful, where I never felt bad for Joe Shane ever until the playoffs, and I'm like, okay, enough.
Right.
We're never getting our season Hard Knocks again, by the way. It was so
you
good the
ruined it,
first time
Joe.
around.
You
We're
ruined
never
it,
getting
Joe.
it again.
But I get it, and it became so difficult to watch Saquon have so much success just knowing that Joe Shane had to walk into John Mara's office or see him in the facility. Like, how difficult of those conversations had to go. Just knowing that you did something the owner really didn't want you to do, and he's now having the most spectacular season we've seen.
This is like the other side of the coin with the Derrick Henry thing working out as well as you possibly could have wanted it to. The Saquon Barkley thing worked out as poorly as it could have for John Mara.
That's so true.
Like, whatever he envisioned the worst case scenario, it's been
literally
worse.
That's why it's hard.
It could still get worse if the Eagles win the Super Bowl.
But
I know, there's still another layer to this. You're right.
Up to this point, it's been as painful as it possibly could have been. He had one of the greatest running back seasons of all time, and the team is in the Super Bowl. And John Mara's sitting there being like, I guess I have to keep these guys. I don't know.
And what's so crazy is I remember sitting in Saquon's living room. So I went down right after Hard Knocks came out to just go sit and talk to him about the experience and what this was like to watch it in real time. And from his perspective, it was a much quicker decision. It wasn't like they dragged it out. It was like, hey, we're moving on from you. See you later. But even I just think for him personally, while I knew he was forcing himself to move on because he had to turn the page on his time with New York, I think deep down he never really thought they'd let him walk. Yeah. So when we spoke to him on camera, I still feel like he was wrapping his head around it, even though they had training camp coming up in a week or two. And he always gave me the impression that he was heartbroken by it all and crushed that they didn't want him back. And I think so much of that is the fuel to the success that we're seeing this year.
We're going to have a show later this week that you and I are going to do about just the shifting narratives around some of the main players in the Super Bowl and just the way we think about them now compared to the way we thought about them at the beginning of the season. I think that Saquon is, to me, at the top of that list. And we don't have to dig into it now, but it's coming into the year, it's like, well, he's a running back, and how much difference can they really make? And they took him second overall in New York, and it was fun for a little bit, but was that actually the best move? And he kind of felt like a what-if player, and now all of that what-if has been removed. We have fully realized what Saquon Barkley is, to the joy of the Eagles and to the dismay of the Giants.
He was touched by the hand of God, was the quote that they gave
Jeff
when they drafted him. Touched by the hand of God. Like, well, I believe it now.
Those are our highlights from this season. The off-season has now gotten started in earnest because of what's been happening at some of these All-Star games. Shrine Bowl, Senior Bowl. The off-season starts in Mobile, right? The draft starts in Mobile. We all know this. That's where some of these rumors get kicked up, and it's where we get our first look at the 2025 draft class. And so to kind of get into that conversation, I actually chatted with our draft expert at The Athletic, Dane Brugler, last week to get his initial thoughts on the 2025 class, this group of quarterbacks, and what the discussion around this draft looks like. Let's get to that conversation with Dane right now.
Obviously, the quarterback conversation is likely going to change, like you said, when coaches start getting involved, when owners start getting involved. Those are different motivations and mindsets than a pure evaluator might apply to this quarterback class. But as we currently sit, when it's really just those people with their eyes and attention on this group, how do you see it shaking out? Like, in a vacuum, do you feel like Cam Ward is likely to go in the top 5? And if the answer to that is yes, what happens after that? Is Shedeur Sanders also a top 5 pick as it currently stands? Or is it a situation where we might only get one quarterback at the top of the draft and then things outside of the top 5 become a little bit murkier?
Yeah, I always go back to the Kenny Pickett draft, and literally the day up to that draft, checking in with different people around the league, saying what's going to happen, how many quarterbacks are going to go top 10? Is Malik Willis going to sneak in there? And every response was the same. It was like, I don't know, but they're going to go. They're going to go. And we had one quarterback drafted in the first 73 picks. So this year, it's not going to be quite like that. But, I think Cam Ward's the favorite to be the first quarterback drafted. That's, it's not a for sure thing. It's not, don't put that in pen. But the general feeling around the league is Cam Ward to be the first quarterback drafted. And I think that it's all eyes are on the Giants at 3. Do they move up to 1? And it's an interesting proposition because if you're the Titans, obviously, new GM Borgazzi coming over from the Chiefs, how does he handle this situation? how does he feel about Will Levis? How does he feel about the roster, how the way it's constructed currently? Do he feel like maybe they're a quarterback away from just reloading? They don't need to tear it down. How does he feel about these quarterbacks? These are all questions that are unanswered right now. But looking at the Giants, if they want to move up to 1, I don't think the price is going to be that crazy. This isn't going to be a situation where the Panthers traded up with the Bears and they gave up everything that they did to have that number 1 pick that year. This is going to be, okay, you're only moving back 2 spots if you're the Titans. And, if the Titans, or say the Giants offer you 2 2s, that might be enough in this year's class. Yeah. Because if you're the Titans, you feel like you're playing with house money here. You're still going to get one of the 2 best players in the draft at 3. And I think they probably maybe trade back even again if they can. So I think this is an interesting year for figuring out where the quarterbacks are going to go. But it starts with the Giants. We know they're backed into a corner. They can't go into next year without having some type of answer at quarterback. And so are they really going to go after Sam Darnold, or are they going to go a quarterback in this draft? I think Cam Ward makes the most sense. But of course, once Brian Daboll when he gets involved in this, how does he feel about these quarterbacks? He might feel totally different than the scouts feel.
And then you get to the Giants and it's like, we have to do this. We have to do this because we need to salvage our jobs and we need to make sure that we're selling a picture of hope to ownership and the fan base coming out of this. So just the dialogues in each of these buildings about why you would need a quarterback in this moment, even if they're a little bit underwhelming, I feel like that has to fuel some of this.
No doubt. And with the Giants, it's very real. I mean, everybody knows that they have to find an answer at quarterback. They can't go into next year with some type of bridge option. It's not going to work. I won't be surprised at all when we have one quarterback go in the top 5. And I think it'd be Cam Ward. It's just, does he go? All signs point to the Giants. Is it at 3 or is it 1? Do they move around? But it'd be very surprising if the Giants don't come out of this draft, out of this first round with one of these quarterbacks.
Dane, it's always good to have these conversations with you because that means the draft season is really getting going. And that means that we are getting closer and that those conversations are going to really ramp up here over the next month or so. Excited to do that. Excited to hear from you. Always appreciate the time, sir.
Yep. Enjoy New Orleans.
Diana, Dane handles the draft side of this, the evaluation side of this. You also go to Mobile every year, but this is more about the conversation and about what the rumor mill looks like as we get into the offseason. What were your main takeaways from the discussions you had with NFL personnel down in Mobile last week?
First, I love seeing the contingents that these teams send. So if you're picking at the top of the draft, you send everybody. I'm like, why is that guy here? He's like the assistant's assistant. But that's what they do, right? Because they're all in it together. They want everyone's thoughts, everyone's opinions. They're doing as much work as they possibly can to make sure that they get this right. Now, that being said, we know that there are teams in this draft that are looking for a quarterback. The New York Giants, the Cleveland Browns, as I've mentioned, are teams that are doing work. We physically have seen them do work. They've attended workouts and practices of the top guys coming out. But because we know that this isn't a very quarterback-friendly class, and the over-evaluation appears to be the conversation everyone's having, is which organization is going to be the one to get this wrong because they're pressed, because they're desperate, and they want this player to have the potential to be great, but may be overdrafted in this process because they have such a need.
Is there a team at the top of the draft that you're particularly compelled by? Like, is it Tennessee at 1? Is it what the Giants are going to do? As you think about the top 5, who are you paying the most attention to, Derek?
Oh, I hate that you said 5 because to me it's the Raiders by a long shot, who are just at 6, who are right outside of it. But I think it's them by a long shot. I actually do think there's a world where one of the quarterbacks is available to them because I think, and it seems like the league believes this too, this crop of quarterbacks is not as good as the Drake May, Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels tier that we got last year. I think these guys are in what was last year's tier of Bo Nix and Michael Penix and J.J. McCarthy, guys that you can take in the middle, late first round. And so I do think there's a chance that there actually might be teams who are willing to pass on these guys or let it fall and be like, you know what, there are other really good players in this class. Let's let it fall away. We can try to figure it out next year. We can go sign Sam Darnold. We can go get a Kirk Cousins, whatever it is. So to me, it actually is the Raiders, in part because I think among all those other teams that are in or around the top 5, they are the closest to being an actually kind of good team. I actually sneaky think they have a chance to be pretty good next year. So they, to me, are the most compelling.
I'm looking at the teams behind the quarterback needy ones at the top. Jacksonville and New England at 4-5, 5-4. The Patriots need everything, right? It doesn't really matter.
Except the
The
quarterback.
Patriots don't need a quarterback. So however the draft falls to them, great. If it's Travis Hunter, if it's whatever offensive lineman, if it's the receiver that we like, they need everything. Jacksonville is a team that I kind of stopped thinking about for like 3 straight months because why would I do that to myself? But as I think about them with Liam Cohen and Brian Thomas Jr. and some of the weapons that they have and Trevor Lawrence, I'm tempted to just drop the best offensive lineman onto the Jaguars from whatever this class looks like and then get way more excited about them than they have any business garnering as we think about next season. Is that wrong?
Yeah, no, I like your take on that, and I also the other buzz was just the fact that this is such a strong offensive line class. So you mentioned teams like the Patriots who are up at the top. That makes sense for them. That is a need. They have a lot, but that's definitely going to be a priority for them. I'm interested to see what New England's going to do in terms of even just perhaps maybe trading out, maybe trying to get some more draft capital as they continue to try to build and completely change that roster that really was in a bad place last year. But the buzz was certainly just how good this offensive line group has been, which we haven't really had in a while. I feel like it's been a few years since we were really there were studs. There were some stud offensive linemen in the last draft class, but to have a collective 5-6 guys that everyone's talking about it's great for that position.
One of the other conversations you and I touched on a little bit last night on the show that is available on the Scoop City feed, on the Athletic Football show feed, wherever you guys listen to your podcasts, we chatted about the veteran quarterback market on top of the rookies. One of the names that came up, and I think this arguably could be one of the biggest dominoes to fall this offseason, is what happens with Matthew Stafford and the Rams. Obviously, there was some tension heading into last year about his contract. They reworked that, but maybe not to his satisfaction. He's getting a little bit older, not a ton of guaranteed money left. Is Matthew Stafford going to be available this spring? I think is going to be one of the biggest questions left to be answered. I talked about this, Diana, last night. We had a couple teams that were front of mind for us. In your mind, what is a fun potential Matthew Stafford landing spot if he is actually available this offseason?
He had a spicy one, so you better come through.
I mean, I keep bringing up the Raiders.
I was going to
again,
say, there's your Raider quarterback.
I really do think they're not that far away from being decent.
You really think that they're close?
Not like close to being like a Super Bowl contender, but like...
Then why would you trade for a 37-year-old quarterback?
I think if Matthew Stafford has 3 years left in him, let's just charitably assume he has 3 years left in him, I really don't think it's that crazy for them to be pretty competitive next year, and then the year after that really try to jump into the window. I don't know if that's like the build that they want to go for, but I really do think that if Pete Carroll wants to kind of jumpstart this thing and really get into it, I do think that's a legitimately good spot for him to do it.
I'm going to make a very weird comparison here. My wife and I, we loved our dog, and so we would always joke that the dog was just going to live forever, and we were telling ourselves a story about that. You thinking that Matthew Stafford is going to play football until 40, based on the punishment that he takes and based on the decline we already saw this year, that is the most like, I want this to be true framing of his career that is even possible.
If he's already made it this far with the beating that he's made, I think there is a chance that he's like Iron Man his way to 40.
I also am choosing to believe this because I want it to be true, but that is one of the rosier outlooks on the next 5 years of Matthew Stafford's career.
So he likes the idea of Matthew Stafford going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's his answer.
I do like that. I do think they are also pretty close to ready-made. I'm honestly not that convinced that the Steelers roster as it is like that much better than the Raiders. It's just the Raiders coaching, I think, was so bad, and Tomlin and that coaching staff is obviously so good that it really shifts the math on how that's able to
Well, the
work.
Raiders
So
got
I'm gonna-
Chip Kelly now, so...
We're going to do
I'm
our
kind of
worst
interested in Chip
takes
Kelly.
from 2024 here in a second.
favorite
I'm going to have our producers clip out what you just said about the Raiders and the Steelers. So when we get to next year's version of this show, we already have some stuff to work through.
This is contingent on whoever the Raiders land at quarterback.
So back before this season, obviously, we're making tons of predictions, half of which I barely remember. They're always all over the place, and I think it's instructive to revisit some of those predictions at a time like this to talk about what we got wrong and why. So that's what we're going to dig into right now, is some of our worst takes from the 2024 preseason, and we're going to get started with a Derek one that is just, it's absolutely beautiful.
Ooh, you had a good one, huh?
There are 3 wild card teams. The Jets are one of them. Who else did you have?
Yep, the Jets, the Bengals, which I feel weird about just because Burrow's health, the Chase thing, the defense, but I still think if Chase is out there and if Burrow is mostly healthy, this team probably still wins double-digit games, and they'll get there. And then my other one was
They also have a very easy schedule, and I think the ceiling on offense is still extremely high. So I had the Bengals as one of mine as well.
that's the thing. Even if the defense is mid, there's a chance they score 27 points a game. So it's like whatever. And then my other one, I actually had a really hard time with this. And so I kind of just, again, went with the most fun one because I think there were 5 different teams I could pick. I went with the Jacksonville Jaguars, man. I need it to happen so bad.
I don't hate this at all. So my 3 were the Jets, the Bengals, and the Dolphins. But I had 4 teams that I listed that I was like, all right, I could just throw one of these teams in here and be totally fine. The Jags are the first team that I listed because if Ryan Nielsen can get that defense to like an average place, and we think that the circumstances around Lawrence are improved from last year, the running game infrastructure, they turn the ball over less. They're less of an absolute clown show in the red zone.
Can't be worse.
Easy. They can't be worse. That's the tagline for the 2024 Jags. We said this, I think it was on the AFC South show. The 2024 Jaguars, it can't be worse. And so there's a path for them to win like 9-10 games to potentially sneak into the wild card. I 100% acknowledge that.
Every year when you do this, you learn what to do and what not to do. And I think my biggest takeaway, or one of my biggest takeaways from this off-season just narrative spree, I will never again for the rest of my life ever say about a team, it can't be worse. Because guess what? It can always be worse.
The worst part about that, too, is it's the Jacksonville Jaguars. We should have probably assumed that it can be worse because we've seen it be worse for as long as I've been a football fan. I kind of have with all of these 3 teams that I predicted to make the playoffs and did not make the playoffs, varying levels of like disappointment. With the Bengals, I don't feel bad about that take. I think everybody thought the Bengals were going to make the playoffs.
What we just said on there, I said have the chance to have an elite offense, and they had an easy schedule. They had an easy schedule, and they were one of the best 3 or 4 offenses in the league. Those things turned out to be true.
And over the second half of the year, they looked like that team. And then you have the Jaguars who, it did go worse than we thought it would go. I think I full-heartedly believed that team would be good, though. So there's still an element of like, I kind of lived as I died with that team. I'm always going to believe in them. So
where were you most wrong? Like,
About
what
that team
aspect of the
specifically?
Jags do you feel like, I cannot believe that I thought this in August of last year based on how the season went?
That defense was the worst defense in the league. I thought they would be above average with a chance to be like top 8. I thought Ryan Nielsen was a really good coordinator. I thought they brought in the right guys. I thought their front was going to play really well. And then literally none of that turned out the way that I was hoping.
You were
it would.
listening to the owner too much, saying that
Probably,
it was the best roster
probably.
that was ever constructed in the history of the NFL. All right, he didn't say that, but it was along the lines of that.
That Ryan Nielsen point on there, I wish that didn't exist. Like, I wish that tape was burned because I feel like we were both in a similar spot there. You and I are not immune to this. We had our own missteps as we were trying to predict what would happen during the 2024
plural.
season. So we are going to get to Diana's right now.
Okay, I wish we had a drum. I got the Packers and the Texans in the Super Bowl in New Orleans.
Oh,
and CJ Stroud hosting up the Lombardi Trophy with the Houston Texans getting their Super Bowl.
So you think they can run it back and get even better? Year 2, D'Amico. Year 2, CJ.
I just think he has figured out the secret sauce of coaching hard, yet coaching in a way that brings out the best in his players. The addition of Stephon Diggs, obviously with CJ Stroud now taking another step. It's his second year. That's it. And he's
so
already
good.
looking like one of the top quarterbacks and perhaps maybe one of the best to ever do it. That's the goal for him. So I believe
love
that this
pick.
this could be the season that we see Houston do it.
Dan, I have to tell you this, but we are in New Orleans now, and
Yes.
neither the Texans nor the Packers are here.
Yeah.
Explain yourself.
Whoever bedazzled that shirt I was wearing, the glue must have gotten my head when I came up with that take. Look, I obviously was high on the year that CJ Stroud had.
I think we all were a little bit. I think
Yeah.
there was a contact high for a lot of us
And-
from this year that CJ Stroud had.
So I appreciated what they did, and I think D'Amico Ryans is one of the best coaches in football. I liked what he did in his first year, and even just spending some time around the Texans in training camp, where it was actually the same few days I spent in Cleveland with the Browns.
Yeah, you and I saw each other that week.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
It was such a stark comparison between what I was watching on the field with the Browns and then with the Texans. They looked awesome, and it was just the summer. And obviously with the addition of Stephon Diggs, which was was a great trade, and unfortunately he was injured. So all intentions that they were there on paper, it makes sense. I didn't consider that they would have some protection issues, that CJ would hit a little bit of a sophomore slump.
Receiver injuries,
Receiver injuries, perhaps an offense that appeared a little stale at times. But what I like about them, they made a hard decision. They made a few hard decisions. They hired Nick Caley to come in from the LA Rams to now be the new offensive coordinator. And I think they know their problems. Sometimes that's the hard part, is figure out what are we not good at. And now I think this last season they figured that out.
We're not done talking about the Texans here, but I think the fact that the Texans were a disappointing team this year for a lot of people. I picked them to go to the Super Bowl against the Lions, so I'm not immune to this. I think it's hard to have as disappointing of a season as the Texans had compared to expectations, and for me not to feel any worse about the head coach or the quarterback that I felt. Maybe I feel a little bit worse about CJ Stroud, but even if the Texans fell short this year, I'm not going into this offseason being like, oh man, we were really wrong about CJ Stroud. And I feel the same way about D'Amico, and I think it's twofold. One, the way that the defense played all the way until the end, right? I mean, that defense is imbued with attitude, mentality, the type of stuff you want to see from a defensive-minded head coach. And I do think the circumstances, Derek, around the quarterback were so bad that maybe I'm rationalizing it, maybe I'm just ignoring some of the evidence that's in front of us, but I still actually feel pretty good about the D'Amico Ryan CJ Stroud partnership at the core of this thing for the Texans.
I couldn't agree more, because if you actually look at where the team landed just on an objective basis at the end of the year, they still won their division, they still got to the divisional round of the playoffs, and they'd won a wild card playoff game. The problem is that just getting the road there was not what we wanted it to be, and it felt very bad. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that bad of a season. And to your point, Robert, the only reason I think this team was even able to drag themselves to that point was D'Amico is everything that we thought he was going to be as a defensive play caller. All of the young players on defense stepped up. Derek Stingley's an all-pro now, or it looks like one. Yeah, they're goblins all across the board, all three levels. Jalen Petrie, Azeez Al-Shaair, Will Anderson Jr., Daniil Hunter was maybe the best pass rusher in the league for a little bit outside of Micah Parsons.
Like what Lassiter was. Like watching Lassiter in the back half of the season, I was just like, whatever Kool-Aid they give these guys to believe in wanting to play this way, Kamari Lassiter's drinking it by the jug like every single day. I also had some bad Texans takes, and this one's even worse because my bad Texans take or bad Texans thought actually plays into something else that we're going to have to worry about this week. So let's get to my thought about the Houston Texans compared to another team in the AFC with my worst take of the 2024 offseason.
So this is tough because I kind of thought that I would get the Lions.
I was about to say, are you still going to give me Lamar one way or the other?
Yes, I'm going to go with the Texans.
Oh, okay. I mean, that's who I had. It was if you didn't take him, I was gonna take him. So I mean, I feel I get it.
I don't really have a good reason for why I'm doing this. I think it's just I feel like they could be one of the teams this year. Like when every year there's like one team that takes that huge step forward and just kind of everything falls into place. And they can win 12, 13 games. They play in a shitty division relatively to a lot of these other teams. Even though they're playing a first-place schedule, division-wise, of all the good teams in the league, I think you could make an argument they probably play in the weakest division. Like if you stacked up the top 10 in this list, I think they probably play in the weakest division of all of them. So I just think that they have a chance to be a high-level offense with Stroud going into year two. And I really like the promise of the defense. I'm a little bit worried that I'm just chasing like the shiny new thing here and that I should go with a defending MVP and a team that has shown an ability to be a top one defense. Even with Mike Macdonald going, they're still probably going to be a top 5 defense, but I just want to be on the Texans train, man.
But that's the thing. How many head coach quarterback combos would you rather have than those two right now? Like regardless of the rest of the any other roster,
great way to frame it.
Like other than Pat and Andy, like you can almost start the argument right after that.
And I think that's a great point, but also there's runway for so many of these young guys on this team. Like with that Stingley pick, and I don't want to be too intoxicated by one-off moments in the preseason, but you saw flashes of that last year from him. Will Anderson takes a step forward in year 2. Daniil Hunter is now on this team. Like, I'm in, man. Like Tank Dell can be even better than he was last year, potentially. The offensive line was a disaster. Like I do think that
in the right scenario where everything falls into place for this team, like they could be the number 2 seed in the AFC. I do think that there's enough of a void in that conference specifically where that could potentially happen. A lot of that is embarrassing on its own. Here's where it gets more embarrassing. Me picking the Texans over the Ravens set off a series of events as part of the wins pool draft that discussion is attached to. So you and I each picked 7 teams this year. Whoever had the fewest number of wins combined with those 7 teams, 5 good teams, 2 bad teams each, has to pay off a bet on Radio Row this week. I have to pay off that bet tomorrow, in part because of what I just did there. And I think when I knew I made a whoopsie, was watching that game against the Bills and watching the way that Lamar and that offense played. Even if they were only 2-2 at that point, I was like, I've made some mistakes. Every bit of pessimism we had about what the Ravens offense would look like with a couple new offensive linemen didn't matter because of what Lamar was in year 2. Every bit of optimism we had about what the Texans would look like with healthier offensive line, better receivers, none of that came true. So we got the best version of the Ravens offense and the worst version of the Texans offense as I picked the Texans over the Ravens in that wins pool.
It's just a swing and a miss. And
yeah.
Just keep getting up to the plate, though, and keep taking those swings, because one day you're going to make some contact and you get this thing right.
It's going to be 8 years from now as I've paid off all of these embarrassing bets every single year in front of all these cameras.
What's the penalty?
Oh, you'll have to wait and
see. Yeah. I think the funniest thing about that too, one, it's always an AFC team that gets you. Like last year, it was kind of like it's been the Chargers, it's been the Bengals, you're picking these AFC teams that keep getting you. But I will say, in the draft, and this is obviously my own hubris, people thought we were gonna win. But when I was like, I get the Ravens after getting like the Lions, I was like, this is too much. And maybe this is me I believe in Lamar Jackson so much, so surely it will go well. But this was the moment where I thought I had it in the bag.
This year, I got a little too cute, and I picked some teams based on schedule and about projection. Next year, I'm just picking the best quarterbacks I can over and over and over again. That was your plan, and it worked out, and hopefully I'm going to learn my lesson.
See, they think you have to study all this film and consume all this NFL. Nope, just pick the team with the best quarterback, and you're a winner.
Starting tomorrow, we are going to hopefully be getting to your guys' questions, your interactions. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us on Twitter. Reach out to us in any different way you can. Leave some comments on YouTube, and hopefully we'll be able to incorporate those into the live stream tomorrow. That is all for The Athletic live from New Orleans for today's show. We will be back tomorrow with a great slate of guests. Andrew Marchand from The Athletic, our media reporter, is going to be joining us. Kirk Cousins, Michael Pittman, and those are just the first names in what is going to be a stacked lineup over the next 4 or 5 days here as we come to you with The Athletic live from New Orleans. That's all we got today. For Derek Klassen, for Diana Rossini, I am Robert Mays. Appreciate you guys spending some time with us. We'll see you over the course of the week.